Okay, everybody, welcome to the 1804 show. I'm your host, Dollar Will. I'm coming to you with another video. You know, we trying to get these technical difficulties abrupt and trying to fix these connection problems. You know, I just can't wait to really begin this interview. I've been waiting for this for weeks, and we, going to teach y'all something. And I can't wait, man, because out of all the days, I want to have, technical problems. Hey, John, I'm trying to get you in here, man. Yeah, we're really trying to, let me see. Okay, this is how we going to do this since this is not working out. I'm going to just do it like that. See if video chat him on for my laptop. Gonna turn this around. Okay, John, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, we finally get.
You hear me? Yeah, can you hear me well? Okay, we finally get.
Yeah.
It's a little delayed, but that's okay.
Okay, well, I already read your bio. Unless you want me to do it again.
It's up to you. I don't care.
Okay, well, started, man. First of all, thank you for coming to the show.
Sure.
And how about you give us your background a little bit?
Sure. Well, I've been, as you said earlier, I've been doing counseling for over 30 years, specializing in trauma and addictions. And I started working on this topic in 1989 when I was working as doing addictions counseling in Baltimore City. And someone told me their father was a Black Panther killed by the police. And I was learning a lot about the underworld from my clients, but also doing research on the side about it all. And I wrote maybe a short story about it in Baltimore and read it in Baltimore, and people liked it and were buying copies of that short story at a local, some local bookstores. And so that was like made into a chapbook at that time. I don't know if you remember those things or you have heard of those things. But then, and one of the characters was, as I say, was based on the client I was counseling. But so I researched the Black Panthers. When I was researching the New York Black Panthers, I found that the Shakurs, of course, were the leading New York Black Panthers. And I saw the situation happen with Tupac City. And at that time, I moved to Washington. I was this was about up to 1994, November '94. So I moved to Washington, and in Washington D.C. in the Washington Post, they said another strange twist. The same police officers that came upon Tupac when he was shot in the New York recording studio lobby were the first to come in another part way out of their district for the sexual assault situation. And so it listed other strange twists in, police kind of foul play. And so I cold called Tupac's New York trial lawyer, Michael Treef Warren, and said, do you think they're trying to kill Tupac like they were trying to kill his Black Panther parents in another, FBI counterintelligence program? And he said, yes, and nobody's writing about it. And I was like, well, I wanted to write an article about that subject for the, activist magazines around the country, which he also read. Z Magazine, Covert Action Quarterly, which was started by a CIA whistleblower, things like that, The Nation. And so he gave me an hour or two interview, and I wrote an article. But the activist magazines at that time were dominated by whites who weren't all understanding that Tupac could be only pretending to be a gangster in order to appeal to gangs and politicize them. And that's what I later found out. But I knew he was, had an activist, and that the police were likely trying to kill him for that activism. But I didn't get the full picture until about a year or two later when I interviewed his business manager and longtime political mentor, Watani Tayahimba, who was a former Black Panther. And Watani, I asked Watani, was he only pretending to be this gangster in order to appeal to? And so that's not. So it's sad that people didn't really find out who he really was because of that act of his. But he was a political prodigy. I mean, he was an intellectual prodigy. He was a political leader before he became a rapper. He was head of the New African Panthers, which was active in 8 to 10 cities around the country. And so, yes, the FBI's that activism and that potential to influence many millions around the world. And he had the kind of potential that Fred Hampton had, in the sense that he was universally loved by all races, and it had the potential to class war against the oligarch, the powers that be, to stop them from doing all they're doing to the 99% of us, which is really genocidal, I think, for these days, especially with everything going on. But they've been that way for a long time with getting the drugs in communities of color and just hurting us all in different ways with their different programs.
I wanted to ask you, so when people, basically talk about, Tupac being just a rapper, being a gangster, or he was just a menace, but a lot of people doesn't understand how many life and death situations that he been in. So can you?
Sure. So one thing people have to understand is that Afeni Shakur was his mother, who was a one-time leader of the New York Black Panthers. It was elected Harlem. Had the Harlem Black Panthers while her husband Lumumba was in jail, and she was let out on bail with Panther 21. Revolution, she said. And when I talk about revolution, I don't mean like a war with guns necessarily. I mean just using guns for self-defense while you try to change things, change all society for the better, for the masses, for the 99% of us. And so when a preacher in Harlem, Reverend Daltrey, asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up, his lifelong mission was to be this activist changing things for the better. And so he never gave that up. And so when he started to add wealth and fame with that first, solo record release, Tupacalypse Now, and that got his first video got that worldwide MTV release, Trapped. Right a few days after its release, police stopped him supposedly for jaywalking in Oakland, beat his head, choked him unconscious, and beat his head into the curb. And I show evidence of people dying in police hands from those those behaviors. Then there was a shooting on his from the premiere of Juice to the after party. And then there was the situation with the Marin Fest. Now, the best evidence on that situation was that strangers tried to punch him first and then shot at him for no reason. And his close merely took out a gun and shot up at the sky, according to eyewitnesses, in self-defense to scare the attackers away. And they kept attacking. And the best evidence is that the FBI's Agent Held, the supervisor for the San Francisco Bay Area, orchestrated that incident because all the with mob influence and things like that he got the mob of people at Marin to try to kill Tupac in that situation, including a guy who said on film that he was friends with Tupac before that, but he was kind of influenced by these techniques, these psychological techniques, to go after Tupac and his group. And so this was 1990, I believe it was 92 at that point. There was this undercover agent named Jacques Agnon. He's known in different interviews by his false names, his pseudonyms, aliases like Nigel and other things in interviews. But everyone knows Haitian Jack knew he was working for the feds in that song. That was Jacques Agnon. He was Florida I mentioned earlier. got someone on the inside to get his rap sheet, and he said he had a long list of major offenses, major charges, and he was basically let off on all of them. Okay, he said that's a sure sign of an undercover agent. Someone working, and this was in cities up and down the East Coast, so it was obviously a federal issue that he was working for the feds and not just police. So that's just some of the evidence that this guy Jacques Magnan set up the sexual assault situation. That was basically, according to court documents I got, because I got the court documents on the case from the lawyers, that it was touching. He got only found guilty. He got sexual assault, attempted sodomy, forced sodomy, things like that. All these things. He was only found guilty for touching a woman's butt against her will. After they both said in court testimony that there was consensual sex. Okay. So after a few nights before, he said, I love the way you F-U-C-K, and I want to do it some more. Had that on tape, and the police said they accidentally erased the tape. Okay. So they erased evidence. They tampered with evidence, and so that's just some of that, of what was going on. So then he ends up getting shot at by supposedly off-duty police officers in Atlanta. Now, according to the eyewitnesses, I talked to Tupac's cousin who saw it live. I talked to Watani Himbo who saw it live. So I got the newspaper records from Atlanta where it happened. And the best evidence is that a group, some white witnesses, that it looked like a mob of whites, a group of whites, ran over Tupac's car. And the evidence is that they actually first broke the window, Tupac's window, with the butt of their gun, shot at him. Tupac really rolled out the back of his car, grabbed the security guard's gun, and shot back in self-defense. And he hit the white police officers, who were off duty at the time, so they weren't in police clothes, and they didn't say police, which could have saved them. When Tupac shot back, he didn't know he was shooting cops. He thought he was just shooting random people who were trying to kill him, and he shot them in the butt and the leg as they were, pointing their gun back whilst they're running away because they saw that huge group coming out of their cars. So Tupac is completely let off of that situation. Now, how many times can you go into the Deep South and shoot and be a black man let off? So why did they completely let him off? Because they didn't want the evidence to come out that this was an attempted murder by the police. It was too obvious. They had stolen a gun from an evidence locker. It was what police call a throwaway gun. I have the police testimony from another trial that they call that a throwaway gun. So that when you do an illegal murder, you can just lay it aside. It's unmarked. It's clearly another attempt to murder Tupac. Then you got the situation with the Quad Studio, Quad Recording Studio, November 30th of 1994. And that was right before the jury was supposed to come out with a verdict on Tupac's trial situation, which was a big setup poorly for the prosecution. And so with that situation in the Quad Studios, one bullet put Tupac on the ground, and then there was 2 bullets put in his skull, according to a doctor's affidavit, which was she signed an affidavit to exactly what how she examined Tupac and what she found. It's in court records. I have that copy of that. I have it in the book. You can see a copy of it in the book. 2 bullets out the front of Tupac's skull while he was lying face down on the ground, and they barely missed his brain. Those 2 bullets barely missed his brain. Now that's the modus operandi of police, military assassinations. You put 1 bullet to get them on the ground, and you put 2 bullets in their head. They did that to Huey Newton, and what's interesting is the fact that when they tried to kill Tupac at the 1992 Marin Fest, it was an exact 3-year anniversary of when they assassinated Huey Newton, who Tupac loved, and Tupac was consulting with when he was part of the New African Panthers. So here we have yet another police assassination attempt, and of course, and then finally it's where you have undercover police and FBI agents all around the situation. Kevin Hackey said he was working for the FBI at that time. He was one of Tupac's top 2 bodyguards. Frank Alexander was police. Reggie Wright even admitted working with the feds in a recent interview. In terms of, he just said he's only been a police officer, but I argue that he was still undercover police when he had the police, all the security guard around Tupac not have guns. He gave them cell phones without batteries that didn't work, and so he completely set up a situation for Tupac's execution. Now, why did he do that? And U.S. intelligence. And what was his father? His father was head of the gang unit in Compton. And why is that important? Because Tupac's agenda, his thug life agenda, and what I said before was his agenda of pretending to be a gangster in order to appeal to gangs and politicize them, was part of the gang peace truce movement. His family had helped start in Los Angeles, and then spread throughout California, and then spread throughout the country. And that was a huge threat to the powers that be, because it started getting loads of gangs to start doing more honest work. And it spread to New York City, so that the the Latin Kings, the largest gang in New York City, stopped dealing drugs completely. That's been documented by New York professors in a book about that, their transformation to activism, based on Tupac's thug life movement, and basically the gang peace truce movement that the Panthers and Tupac were involved in. And so, about that in the book and all, and if you ever want to talk about Black leaders, and also drugs as weapons against us. Now, drugs as weapons against us just adds the element of why the CIA got involved. Because when you get into drug trafficking, drug dealing and drug trafficking, that's CIA territory. They're the biggest drug traffickers in the world. That's been documented that they were drug trafficked in the Washington Post, that they were, CIA was drug trafficking, especially around the Iran-Contra situation with the, crack cocaine scandal down, with the Contras in Nicaragua. So when Tupac was threatening to affect billions of dollars of profits in drug trafficking, and tens to hundreds of works is when you have all that cash going through the banks, and they're money laundering it, it adds to the corporate profit by 20 or 30 fold by stock market value. And that's where the huge money is that he was affecting with his gang peace truce movement that he was helping engender around the country.
Well, it's just unfortunate because, we have been indoctrinated into thinking that we come from the greatest country in the world, but really we don't, and it's just like with the war on drugs, and mainly to really to get our fathers and our grandparents and this and that into prison, and that really broke up a lot of families. And I want to know if that was like pretty much like a government, like a COINTELPRO situation, something else.
You mean trying to get people in prison and all?
Yeah.
Trying to get lots of black families and fathers and people in prison. I think that's partly the counterintelligence program and partly the CIA's different programs. MK Ultra being one of them. I talk more as the CIA War on Musicians and Activists, which is both a book and a film. Talks about MK Ultra, and that's what I think MK Ultra's main focus was a war on people of color in this country, with the use of drugs. Now they did drug trafficking with heroin continued till now, of course, but then they added cocaine to it. Now, not that they were always trafficking cocaine and heroin, but they massively increased it with the war in Vietnam in the Golden Triangle area for poppy fields that produces opium and heroin. And then when they lost that Vietnam War, the amount of heroin started to go down again, so they started in the Golden Crescent for poppy fields, which is the other end of the same mountain range, the Himalayan mountain range, in the Afghanistan area. And that started in 1979, and the CIA was trafficking heroin out of there, and that kept increasing until we get to the Afghanistan War, of course, which it's no coincidence that the two longest wars in U.S. history are Vietnam and Afghanistan, areas in the world for producing heroin. And so they're pumping that into communities of color in a big way. We're all getting affected. All communities are getting affected because the 99%, they're targeting 99% in general. And that's the way the oligarchs are. But they're particularly racist and particularly targeting communities of color. And so that MK Ultra is a huge program that's all best evidence is still going on. It overlaps the counterintelligence program, which says it officially disbanded in 1971 when activists broke into an FBI office and found all these documents and revealed them. But former COINTELPRO agent in the 1990s, I think his memoir came out about 1995, he says he knows that these programs are still going on today with just using different names. And so these are all programs, yes, they're targeting the 99% of us, but particularly brutally targeting people of color and communities of color. And sure, they want to just get people involved in the drug world, imprisoned for things that aren't involved in drugs or anything, things that they shouldn't be jailed for. But that's what they do. It's a psychological warfare, along with actual warfare against communities of color.
Okay, well, back in March, beginning of the pandemic, Matter movement was infiltrated by FBI informants as well.
I don't know for sure, but I saw evidence, video evidence of people that caused loads of, conducted vandalism in a huge way, and then were filmed getting back into cars. So I do think they were probably infiltrated in a big way and made to look bad, but also they did things. Some people think that they helped destroy some of the communities they were marching in because they wanted to destroy small businesses. And, Black Lives Matter didn't want infiltrators that were doing this vandalism, that were destroying, these communities. Now, when I marched with Black Lives Matter in Baltimore, I didn't see any of this vandalism. But, of course, they're going to stay away from the kind of crowds that, that might point them out and show them for what they are. They're going to try to, get the big numbers in other crowds and pretend like it's, they have devious methods and devious ways, and yes, they're doing some ugly stuff, and I think they are infiltrating Black Lives Matter, and it's very sad because we need Black Lives Matter, and we need to, protect ourselves and protect, especially, communities of color and Black men and women.
And I agree, man, and we just had the movie come out, Judas and the Black Messiah. And I always talk about how people who become snitches can affect the whole community, but now snitches don't get in music and pretty much get like a huge fan base off of that. So I just want to know your thoughts about that and how we can prevail in 2021.
Yeah. Well, my War on Musicians and Activists tells of particularly good exposés on how the white community, how there was seemed to be fake musicians like that, snitches in the music industry. These were the sons and daughters of the oligarchs that were all over, becoming instant stars in the white music scene in the 1960s. And I'm sure it was done in the black music scene too, and I'm sure it's being done now in the black music scene, sadly enough, with rappers that are just elevated because they're doing the bidding of the oligarchs. While people like Public Enemy were not promoted at all. Chuck D said that they promote the most negative artists, and they won't promote them and other political artists, positive political artists. Sorry about the phone. And so this has been going on at least since since the early 90s, when Public Enemy was strong, and it's surely still going on today, where they've got these very bizarre things that seem to be trying to promote drugs like crazy, and I show evidence of that in my book, Drugs as Weapons Against Us. I think I show it in the last chapters of the FBI War on Tupac, Shakur, and Black Leaders too, how they just are promoting, all kinds kinds of drugs, ecstasy and other drugs. These rappers tons of fame and just doing in or not promoting or doing in great activist rappers like Tupac and sadly enough Jam Master Jay from the DMC and other just more positive rappers and activist rappers like Paris and just not promoting him at all. I mean, people barely know him. They barely know, some of the other great activist rappers.
Okay. Well, I want to know who you think that really killed Tupac Shakur, because the media always try to make a situation, but after knowing what you said, do you think he was assassinated by the powers to be?
Yes, I mean, he was a national activist leader. He was a international cultural leader. And so, yes, he and it was done. He was assassinated by, U.S. intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
The best evidence out there is that this was a professional job done by, marksmen. And, the high-level police detective, Russell Poole, stumbled upon all he knows. He says this had to be a police operation and police intelligence carrying it out for U.S. intelligence because it was just so sophisticated, the way they carried it out and the way they got away from it and the way they covered it up. And he just, he said, for example, he talked to the Las Vegas police, where it happened, and they said they had a closet full of evidence, told them, lay off of it. So they, it's hugely covered up. And, Russell Poole came out with this, despite superiors, he got tons of promotions as a high-level murder detective, homicide detective. And happening with this, they started demoting him, and he had to retire and to come out with this information and ruin his career to come out with this information. He comes out with it. Randall Sullivan, a veteran journalist, writes a book about Labyrinth. Nick Broomfield does a great movie about it, Biggie and Tupac, and features Russell Poole. And I have a lot of information in my book, of course, and then film. But then they bring in someone like Greg Kading to cover it all up. Now, Greg Kading had retired early because he was a disgraced, police detective who kind of was caught lying in court. And then he becomes, they hire him as his work like crazy, and he's just all disinformation. And of course, they highlight him in major, film, TV films and stuff, and major films in general. And but the A&E documentary done, co-produced by Mopreme Shakur, Tupac's stepbrother, highlights the people like, much more important people than me, like Reverend Al Sharpton, who says this, when people say the kind of things Tupac says, the government doesn't, wants to shut them up. And he basically says, yes, the government did in Tupac, in so many words. And, just the best evidence comes from a guy who they, basically led off of, the guy, Orlando and Keefe D, was basically given massive leniency in court in order to say what they wanted him to say. And so that's the best witness of Greg Kading. And so he's just a joke. He's just a complete disinformation agent. They hired him to come out. He came out with smear Russell Poole and just try to discredit Russell Poole and counter what Russell Poole would come out with.
Yeah, because I know what show you're talking about, the show Unsolved on USA, and I think that really made him look pretty pathetic and weak. Like, to me, from all the interviews that I have watched over the years, he seemed like a very alpha stand-up guy. Correct.
Yeah. Right. I agree.
And
I agree, and they tried to smear him, and they tried to pretend like he just had a heart attack. So coincidentally, when he's coming out with new evidence to a police department that he had when he killed Tupac, And in that meeting, now, a close associate, a co-writer with Jr. was actually in that meeting and surprised Russell Poole, and he thinks that Reggie Wright Jr. killed him in that meeting, for U.S. intelligence. That it wasn't really a heart attack. And so, because the evidence that Russell Poole had was, partly implicating Reggie Wright Jr. and implicating, others who were more directly involved in the murder of Tupac.
Yeah, I wouldn't put it past him, because he always looked guilty every interview he does. And I have a question. A friend of mine want to know is, what about Gene Deal? Do you think everything that he had put out holds some truth to it?
I don't know everything yet. I think he did a great job, Gene Deal, of identifying the real murderer of Biggie. And he put out, some good information. In general, I don't know everything he put out, but some good information about how, Biggie and Puffy were businessmen, and of course Biggie was a great rapper, and they Biggie and identified them. He identified their faces in a photo lineup that Nick Broomfield laid out for him, and this guy who really killed him, and those guys were friends in Death Row Records that Russell Poole said when he found these dozens of his fellow police officers at all levels of Death Row Records. He asked his superiors, "What are they doing there?" And his superior said, "You can call them covert agents." Okay, so Death Row Records was a U.S. intelligence front for gun running and for setting up Tupac's assassination. First trying to control Tupac and manipulate him to put out more negative lyrics, but then when Tupac was leaving them and putting out, his last album was more positive with great songs like White Man's World and Against All Odds, revealing information. So it's a real shame, because Tupac was going to be he had already formed his own record label, or already formed his own acting company, his film company. He's going to make his own films, being offered tons of film roles. He was going to do incredible things, who could do so many incredible things. He when he was only 17 years old, he rewrote Shakespeare in modern language and produced, directed, and starred in a Shakespeare play in high school. He was just amazing. He read hundreds of PhD level books before he was.
Man, and I also want to ask you about the rumors with this body double, and also with trying to remember. We have been seeing a lot of YouTube videos on him possibly being an agent or operative or something.
Being an agent.
Tupac Shakur.
An agent of what?
That's exactly what that's exactly what I mean. But it has been YouTube videos. He was an imposter. That he was a fraud. Pretty much.
That's just a joke. I mean, I'm not going to just anything like that. It's just too much. It's too ridiculous.
Yeah, I just be trying to really, because he was just so unique and so ahead of his time that people don't believe that he could possibly be a person.
The only thing I can say is did they document them? Amnesty International calls them the closest thing we have to brainwashing. Now, I think we actually have brainwashing, but nonetheless, he was manipulated in jail. He was psychologically tortured in jail, and Death Row Records continued the psychological torture. Mm-hmm. And that's why his All Eyes on Me has most negative lyrics he ever put out there. Machiavelli, 10-Day Theory, which was got more positive again. I mean, it wasn't 100% positive. It was getting more positive. And then he was moving away from that psychological torture by Death Row Records. And they would beat up and kill people in front of Tupac. That's the kind of crap they were doing to him. They would constantly feed him drugs and alcohol, beating people viciously in front of him. And so that was a continuation of the penal coercion tactics outside of jail. And that's why Dre got away from Death Row Records, Snoop got away from Death Row Records, and of course Tupac couldn't get away. He was killed before he did. But so did they influence him to put out his most negative lyrics? Yes, but they had control over him at that point, and now that he wrote most of his lyrics within the first few days of getting out of jail when his head was messed up. But no, for the most part, no, he was not manipulated. He was the most of his great activism. He did great work and was not any kind of agent and was not manipulated.
Well, that sums it up, everybody. And I'm going to make sure that I promote your book, John, and find more about these type of subjects. And I just want to say thank you for this interview, man. And I really, really wish you nothing but the best in your future endeavors, man.
Thank you, Will. It's good talking to you.